The cold bit, even through the thin, unfamiliar fabric. I could hear the murmur of voices, distorted, like they were speaking through a thick pane of glass, or maybe I was underwater. Everything was dark, a thick, suffocating dark. There was a faint, intermittent glow from somewhere far off, a flickering pulse that did little to illuminate the walls of what felt like a cage. My hands felt numb, my head heavy, a dull ache throbbing behind my eyes. Where was I? The air hung thick with an odor I couldn't place, metallic, stale, with a bitter undercurrent that made my stomach clench. My name. I tried to remember my name. Reid. Yes, Reid. But the name felt foreign, a borrowed garment, rattling around in an empty space. Then, the jolt. The sudden, jarring lurch of the truck, the sun blinding me through the windshield, dragging me back from the suffocating black. I blinked, rubbing at my temples. Just a flash, a fragment. A nightmare, perhaps, even though I hadn't been sleeping. The road unwound before me, a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through dense, ancient woods. Pine needles carpeted the forest floor, and the air, here, was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. So different from that other place. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My hands, I noted, were steady now, and the familiar weight of my antique watch against my wrist was a comforting anchor. I was Reid, the restorer. A man who found solace in the intricate dance of bringing forgotten beauty back to life. And in a way, it was. This journey, this inheritance, it was a break from my carefully ordered existence. A grand, unsettling deviation. I noticed the way the moss clung to the north side of the trees, the subtle shift in the light as the sun dipped lower, the increasing isolation. No other cars had passed for the better part of an hour. The GPS signal had vanished miles back, leaving me to navigate by an old, creased paper map that felt as ancient as the woods themselves. The road finally twisted, then spat me out into a clearing. And there it was. The manor house. It wasn't merely old, it was ancient, a hulking beast of gray stone and crumbling brick, slumped against the bruised evening sky. 3 stories, it seemed, though some windows were boarded over, others shattered entirely, giving the impression of missing teeth in a decaying jaw. Gables and turrets, once proud, now sagged under the weight of centuries, their finials long since vanished. The roof, a patchwork of slate and missing tiles, looked like a scaly hide flayed open to the elements. A single, rusted iron gate, its hinges frozen solid with neglect, stood half open, listing precariously. Beyond it, a gravel drive, choked with weeds and fallen leaves, snaked towards the house. It settled on my tongue, raising the fine hairs on my arms. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the frantic, almost frantic, beating of my own heart. This place felt less like an inheritance and more like a challenge, a vast, silent accusation. My gaze, ever analytical, swept over the facade. The stone, once a proud, light gray, was now streaked with black and green lichen, like weeping scars. Ivy, thick as anaconda coils, had swallowed entire sections of the walls, its tendrils reaching greedily towards the roofline. I could see the ghost of intricate carvings around what must have been the main entrance, now obscured by generations of grime and plant growth. But what truly snagged my attention, pulling me closer despite the prickle of unease crawling up my spine, was a peculiar detail above the lintel. Nestled amongst the faded, almost indistinguishable carvings of what might have once been heraldic beasts, was a single, starkly unadorned stone block. It was perfectly smooth, almost polished, contrasting sharply with the rough, eroded texture of the surrounding masonry. It felt wrong, out of place, as if it had been inserted much later than the rest of the house, perhaps even after some original feature had been violently removed. My professional curiosity warred with a rising tide of apprehension. This was more than just a restoration project, it was a puzzle, a history waiting to be unearthed. The cold bit, even through the thin, unfamiliar fabric they'd given me, a rough, gray tunic and trousers that smelled faintly of antiseptic and dust. The murmur of voices was still there, a low, guttural thrum that vibrated in my chest, but clearer now, less like water and more like a poorly tuned radio. I blinked, trying to pierce the thick, suffocating dark. There was a faint, intermittent glow, just as I'd remembered. It came from a series of emergency lights affixed high on the walls, casting a sickly yellow-orange pallor over the concrete floor and the rows of empty cots. I was in an intake holding area during a power outage, though I couldn't for the life of me remember how I'd arrived. My last clear memory was of the manor, the dust motes dancing in a single shaft of sunlight. A heavy boot scraped on the floor nearby. "All right, you. On your feet." I flinched, my muscles stiff and uncooperative. A bulky figure stood over me, silhouetted against one of the flickering lights. Where am I?" I croaked, my throat raw. "You were found wandering," the guard stated, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. He wasn't looking at me, but past me, as if I were just another object to be processed. "Disoriented. Rambling. We kept you overnight." Rambling? What could I have rambled about? There was a profound, unnerving blankness where the last few hours should have been. "Power's back on in your area. You're free to go." He gestured vaguely towards a heavy metal door at the far end of the room. "Don't come back." No questions, no explanation, just a dismissive wave. As I stumbled out, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hallway made my eyes water. The air outside was damp and smelled of wet earth, a welcome contrast to the sterile, confined space I'd just left. The sun was already high, painting the sky a pale, indifferent blue. The walk back to the manor was a blur of confused thoughts. How long had I been gone? Why couldn't I remember? The manor loomed, a familiar silhouette against the sky, yet somehow it felt different, taller, more imposing. A shiver traced its way down my spine, unrelated to the crisp morning air. I pushed open the heavy front door. The interior was exactly as I'd left it, or thought I had. It felt as if the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for my return. I headed straight for the study, a room I'd earmarked for initial restoration. It was less structurally compromised than others, filled with the ghosts of forgotten scholars, towering, empty bookshelves, a massive oak writing desk, and a globe whose continents had faded into indistinguishable smudges. This would be my starting point. I meticulously laid out my tools on a canvas dropcloth on the desk, a set of fine-tipped chisels, various brushes, specialist glues, and a small, delicate scraper for removing old varnish. Precision was everything in this work, and I prided myself on my organized approach. Each tool had its place. I picked up a soft-bristled brush, ready to begin dusting the intricate carvings on the desk's legs. A faint clatter from the corner of the room made me pause. I looked up. Nothing. Just a stack of old books, undisturbed. I must have imagined it. I returned to my task, brushing away decades of accumulated grime. I decided to clean the top surface first. I set the brush down, turned to fetch a cleaning solution from my kit, and when I turned back, the delicate scraper I'd laid out was no longer beside the chisels. It was a good foot away, resting precariously on the edge of the desk, almost as if it had been nudged. My brow furrowed. I was certain I'd placed it squarely in the center of the cloth. I must be more tired than I thought, my mind playing tricks on me after the strange night. I repositioned it, a small frown tugging at my lips. I was hunched over the desk, carefully applying a restorative oil to a particularly ornate drawer pull. A low, soft sound drifted from somewhere above me. Not a creak, not a groan, but something akin to a sigh, faint and drawn out, like air escaping a collapsing lung. It seemed to emanate from the floorboards directly above, from one of the bedrooms on the second story. I froze, my hand hovering over the wood. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the vastness of the room. No answer. It must be the house settling, I told myself, the old timbers shifting in response to the changing temperature. It was an ancient structure, after all. I forced myself to resume work, but my concentration was shattered. I felt an undeniable prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a sense of eyes on me, even though I knew I was utterly alone. It was gone before I could fully turn my head, a mere flicker against the wall where the bookshelf met the corner. Just a trick of the light, I rationalized, a dust cloud, my own tired eyes. But the hairs on my arms stood on end. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. The silence was no longer comforting, but menacing. I was being watched. I was certain of it. The emergency lights, sputtering fitfully, cast long, wavering shadows that made the corridor writhe around me. The guard's dismissive wave still stung, a physical ache behind my eyes. No explanation, no questions, just a silent escort to the door. I stumbled out, the damp, earthy air of the outside a sudden, welcome shock against my face. My head throbbed. What had happened? The details felt slippery. A vague accusation, a misunderstanding, something about the manor. My hands clenched, knuckles white. Determination, a stubborn, brittle thing, was all I had left. I had to get back. Had to finish the work. Had to understand. The drive back to the manor was a blur of rain-slicked roads and the rhythmic thump of the wipers. Each turn felt both familiar and strangely alien, as if I'd never seen these trees, these stretches of overgrown field, before. When the hulking silhouette of the manor finally appeared through the downpour, a jolt went through me. Not relief, but a cold, calculating resolve. This place held the answers, and I would tear it apart board by board if I had to. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of rainwater through a crack in the library ceiling. I needed to focus. Needed to work. My eyes fell on the grand fireplace in the main hall, its stone mantelpiece an intricate tapestry of carved figures. I'd been meaning to tackle its restoration, to meticulously clean away centuries of soot and grime. I gathered my tools, the familiar weight of chisels and brushes a comforting presence in my trembling hands. But as I laid them out on a drop cloth, a flicker of confusion snagged me. Hadn't I just used that small, curved scraper? It wasn't where I remembered leaving it. My mind was just tired. I began to work, my movements precise, methodical. The stone yielded slowly, revealing the intricate details beneath. As I worked my way around a particularly ornate section, my fingers brushed against something odd. A seam. Not a natural fault line in the stone, but a hairline crack, almost perfectly straight, that continued where it shouldn't. My breath hitched. This was no flaw. This was deliberate. My heart began to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I picked up a thin, flexible blade, my restorer's instincts overriding the rising unease. With painstaking care, I followed the seam, gently prying. A section of the carving, larger than I'd expected, shifted. It wasn't stone at all. It was wood, cunningly disguised. The air that spilled out was stale and heavy, carrying a faint, cloying scent, dust, mildew, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like forgotten blood. I pulled it out. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages warped and discolored with age. No title, no author. The light from the hall was dim, but I could make out the first few words. The house remembers. It feeds. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, the journal open in my lap, the hidden compartment a gaping maw beside me. The words were disjointed, fragmented, written in several different hands, sometimes overlapping. Dates jumped, names were obscured. But a horrifying pattern began to emerge. He forgets his own name, sometimes, stares at us with eyes like empty wells. The hunger grows. It takes their memories, their very selves. My sister, she walks these halls, but her face is a mask, her voice an echo. We tried to seal it away, to starve it. But it is the house. It is the stone, the wood, the very air. It waits. It dreams. The journal fell open to a page with a crude drawing, a twisted, almost organic symbol, surrounded by a series of fragmented names, each one crossed out, some barely legible. And at the bottom, scrawled in a shaky hand, I am losing myself. My name. What was my name? My breath hitched. My name. Reid. Reid. But for a fleeting, horrifying second, the name felt alien on my tongue. A phantom sensation, as if I'd forgotten it, just for a moment. My hands began to shake violently. This wasn't just stress. This wasn't isolation. The journal wasn't just a record of the past, it was a mirror reflecting my present. The house. It wasn't just decaying. It was feeding. And I was its newest meal. The journal's pages blurred, the words swirling into an incomprehensible mess. What was I doing here? Why was I holding this book? I looked around the hall, the familiar architecture suddenly monstrous, alive. The very air grew heavy, thick with forgotten thoughts, with stolen identities. My meticulous nature, my determination, my very identity as Reid, the restorer, it was all being picked apart, disassembled, piece by piece. The entity wasn't just haunting the house, it was the house, a vast, malevolent consciousness that consumed all who entered, leaving them empty vessels, echoes of the lives they once lived. The meticulous plans for the manor's restoration, the years of training, the very purpose that had brought me here, it all faded, becoming indistinct, meaningless. The determination that had driven me here, that had allowed me to uncover this truth, now felt like a cruel joke. I had sought answers, and in finding them, I had offered myself up. The entity had won. I was no longer Reid. I was just another memory devoured.